Okay, so hello everybody. In this video lecture, we will cover chapter 16, the endocrine system. And of course, we're only gonna really cover a physiology part in this lecture. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. So we have two body systems that are system of control. It's a nervous system and endocrine system. They both regulate your body activities and they both control your homeostasis. So that's why it says over here that endocrine system acts with nervous system to coordinate and integrate the activity of body cells. And by regulating activity of the cells, they regulate activity of your organs and organ systems. Now, endocrine system influences activities of cells by hormones transported into the blood. So hormones are messengers that are produced by endocrine glands and they transported in the blood to their target organs. Response of endocrine system is slow. It's slowly, but it tends to last longer than those of the nervous system. There is analogy. They compare nervous system with a phone call. So, for example, you need to call your friend, right, to tell him something or her something, right, some news. So it's very quick for you to call, and it's very specific, right, and it's short lasting. So you talk about it. That's it. And endocrine system is like putting some note in Facebook, for example. So in Facebook, you update your status, right? So that's some information like learning anatomy and physiology, having lots of fun. And it's not specific, so you don't address it to one particular person, right? It's gonna stay there for some time, and some people will react to your post and some will not react, right? So this is the way of communication, two different ways of communication. Nervous system, fast, specific, and short lasting effect. Endocrine system, slow, not that specific, and it has a lasting effect. Also, nervous system communicates through what? Through electrical impulses and chemicals that we call neurotransmitters. Endocrine system communicates through chemicals that we call hormones. Right, so here we have major endocrine glands like pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, adrenal glands, and gonads. But let's say we have other organs. I don't know if you have pancreas over here. No, but for example, pancreas, right? Pancreas is both endocrine and exocrine gland. So it means it produces hormones and it produces some products through the duct, like digestive juices, and it's an exocrine function of pancreas. So pancreas and gonads as well, they organs that both endocrine and exocrine glands, right? Hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is both neural part of your body, right? Because hypothalamus is a part of diencephalon, so it's a part of your central nervous system, and it also has endocrine function. Plus, almost every other tissue and organs produce some hormones, including your adipose cells, your digestive organs, like your small intestine, your stomach, your kidney, the heart, even bones, skin, right? So those are all different organs that also produce some endocrine hormones. Today, there is some idea in scientific society that pretty much any organ of your body can produce some hormones, some messengers. Right, but those are major endocrine glands. And here's other organs or some organs that have dual function, like endocrine and exocrine gland or neural and endocrine function. So here you can see location of the major glands. So pineal gland, pituitary gland located in the cranial cavity. So we have a thyroid gland, we have thymus. Thymus is just on the top of the heart, superior to the heart. Adrenal gland on the top of the kidneys. A pancreas just inferior to your stomach. And gonads. Of course, for female gonads are ovaries and male gonads are testes. Now, hormones are chemical messengers, but hormones are not the only chemical messengers. For example, neurotransmitters, we talked about them just a second ago, right? They specific to nervous system, not NT, NS, nervous system, sorry, this is just typo. Hormones are long-distance chemical signals that travel in the blood or lymph. And we have other chemicals, autocrines and paracrines. So autocrines are chemicals that are secreted by a cell and they exert effect on the same cell, right? With me. So for example, if this is a cell, right? So here's a cell. And if this cell secretes some chemicals, right, and the same cell has a receptor for this chemical, now then this chemical is called autocrine, right? But if this cell secretes chemicals, so let's say they look like little stars, right? So it secretes another chemicals, and neighboring cell has a receptor of this chemical, right? Then this chemical messenger called paracrine, right? So we have chemicals, autocrines, right? When chemicals that exert effect on the same cells that secrete them, right? So this like little dots, this cell secretes them and the same cell has a receptor for this chemical, so that's autocrine. If neighboring cells have receptors for the chemicals, and those chemicals are called paracrines. Autocrines and paracrines are local chemical messengers and they're not considered to be part of the endocrine system. Hormones secreted, right? So example, this also secretes some other chemicals and they secreted in the bloodstream, right? So when they secreted in the bloodstream, then those chemicals called hormones. Now, two main classes of hormones, amino acid-based hormones and steroid hormones. Now, amino acid-based means they chemically, right, the composition, they made from amino acid. So those gonna be amines, peptides, and proteins. That makes sense because peptides are kind of short proteins, but both peptides, proteins are made from amino acid, and thyroxine. Now, thyroxine is hormone released by your thyroid gland, right? It's also amino acid-based hormone. And steroids, they synthesize from cholesterol, and those are gonadal, so secreted by ovaries and testes, and adrenocortical hormones. Because if you have, so here you have your kidney, right? On the top of kidney, you have adrenal gland. And adrenal gland has like two parts. It has this cortex, right? And inside is medulla. So cortex secretes hormones that we call adrenocortical, right? Cortex, that's why it's adrenocortical hormones. Those are steroid hormones. Medulla secretes amino acid-based hormones, such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, now what actually hormones do to their target cells, right? So for example, here's the cell, right? So here's the cell, and we call it target cell if it has specific receptor for that hormone, right? Receptor can be on the surface of the cell membrane or receptor can be inside, right? So, but when hormone is attached, right, either this receptor on the surface or over here, what effect this hormone will have on its target cell, right? So it can have several effects. First, it can alter plasma membrane permeability of membrane potential by opening or closing ion channels. So it's open or closed ion channels. And you remember when ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, when they start moving in and out, they gonna change this resting membrane potential, right? That's what hormones can do. Then they also can stimulate synthesis of proteins, right? So synthesis of some proteins or some regulatory molecules. They can activate or deactivate enzyme systems. They can induce secretory activity of the cell, so the cells start secreting some product, or it can stimulate mitosis, so cells start dividing, right? So those are all actions of hormones on their target cells. Now, how exactly hormone act? What is the mechanism of action? Because we have amino acid-based hormones, right, and steroid hormones, well, all amino acid-based hormones, they are water soluble, except thyroid hormone, because thyroid is amino acid based, but it's not water soluble, right? So all other amino acid based hormones, they cannot enter the target cell because a cell membrane is mostly lipids. You know, everything that is hydrophilic, everything that is water soluble cannot move through cell membrane. That's why they will have receptors on the membrane. And their mechanism of action is through G protein and intracellular second messenger. The second messenger gonna do one of these, right? The second messenger gonna do one of this, not hormone itself, because hormone cannot enter its target cell. Lipid-soluble hormones, all steroid hormones and thyroid, they directly enter cells and act on intracellular receptors that directly activate genes, right? So now let's look how it works. I'm gonna get to the diagram. Okay, so over here we can see action of water-soluble hormone, right? So here's example of this hormone like epinephrine, ACTH, FSH, LH, glucagon, PDH, TSH, calcitonin. So they all amino acid-based hormones. Now we call this hormone first messenger or ligand. You know, ligand is anything that attaches to the receptor. Any molecule is called ligand. So that's our first messenger, one of these hormones. Now, when this hormone attaches to its receptor, it activates G protein, right? So this is G protein. G protein is a molecule that's made of 3 parts. So here's a very simple diagram, just to understand the process itself. But when G protein is activated, it's actually changing its shape. It splits into several units, and it starts moving along cell membrane inside the cell, because this is cytoplasm. This kind of like beige color or yellow color, it's a cytoplasm, and this is extracellular fluid. So now we inside the cell. First messenger cannot move inside the cell. Instead of that, it's activating G protein moving along this membrane, and it's activate this protein. It's an enzyme. It's called adenylate cyclase. So adenylate cyclase, it converts ATP into CAMP. So it's AMP. AMP has 1 phosphate group. ATP, it's adenosine triphosphate. This is adenosine monophosphate, and it's circular, right? So it's called CAMP. Now this CAMP activates, now this CAMP is our second messenger. And second, so CAMP is second messenger. This is our first messenger. CAMP is second messenger. Now, CAMP activates another protein. It's called protein kinases. So now we have protein kinases that is active, and this protein kinases, it start attaching phosphate groups to different proteins, and it triggers a response. And response can be, you know, either we can open some channels, ion channels, or stimulate secretion, or activates other enzyme, etc. Right? We just said all of these responses really back over here. All of these responses can happen now. Right, so so let's see what else here. Okay, so hormone, first messenger, binds to receptor. Receptor activates G protein. G protein activates adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase converts ATP to CAMP, that is now our second messenger. CAMP activates protein kinases. And protein kinases means, kinesis means some action, right? It's a movement, like kinetic energy, right? So kinesis, it's some action that protein kinases is enzyme that's gonna do something with other proteins. That's why it has name like this, protein kinases, right? Now those kinases that are activated, they phosphorylate various proteins, activating some, inactivating others, right? So, and then that's our, you know, this is our response. They can open the channels, right? They can close the channel, right? So that's what CAMP gonna do. Or I mean, protein kinase after being activated by CAMP. But remember, CAMP is the second messenger. Now, CAMP is rapidly degraded by the enzyme phosphodiesterase, phosphodiesterase, so phosphodiesterase. So there is enzyme rapidly degraded, and however, this signaling has huge amplification effect. So you would think like, oh my goodness, that's kind of like, you know, really silly. You need to go through this whole process, right? So the, you know, first messenger, adenylate cyclase, CAMP, protein kinase, and then other proteins. But this is actually takes, it's a fast and it's really has very huge effect on the cell, because one hormone activates many CAMP. It's not like one hormone and only one CAMP is created. It can be hundreds of CAMP molecules. So you can see how the response of the cells can amplify, right? So one hormone and hundreds of CAMP are activated because of that. So that's why it says it has a huge amplification effect, this enzymatic cascade. Okay, so that was indirect action through G protein. And what hormones have this mechanism of action? Those are water-soluble hormones, all amino acid-based hormones, with exception of thyroid hormone. Now, steroid hormones and thyroid hormones, they have direct activation, direct action, because they diffuse into their target cells, because they are hydrophobic, right? Steroids, so they lipids themselves, except of thyroid. Thyroid is just weird. But they diffuse into their target cells, and they have receptors inside the cells, intracellular receptors. Now, receptor hormone complex enters the nucleus. Then receptor hormone complex bind to a specific region of DNA, and this prompts DNA transcription to produce messenger RNA, right? Transcription, translation, that's a protein synthesis. So mRNA direct protein synthesis. So over here, we can see we have steroid hormone, it enters the target cells, receptor is inside the cytoplasm. It forms this receptor hormone complex that enter nucleus. Again, this is lipid soluble, and this nuclear envelope is lipid barrier, right? So it enters the nucleus. It's promote DNA transcription, so messenger RNA is synthesized, it leaves the nucleus, right? Then translation, and we have protein synthesis. So this is direct, and there is no any amplification effect over here, right? One hormone, one receptor, right? One messenger RNA. It will be several new proteins, right? But it does not have that huge effect as the water-soluble hormones do. Now, target cell specificity. Target cells must have specific receptor to which the hormone binds. For example, for some hormones like ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, the receptors only found on certain cells in the adrenal cortex. For other hormones like thyroxine, receptors are found on nearly all cells of the body, right? So cell will only respond if it has a specific receptor for that particular hormone, and this cell is called target cell. Either those are very specific, or almost all cells can have receptors, for example, for thyroxine. Now, let's say we have 5 molecules, right? 5 molecules of hormones. Is it enough to activate target cells or not? It will not be enough. So what really, what factors are necessary to activate those target cells, right? So target cells activation depends on 3 factors. Blood levels of the hormones, right? We need to have certain concentration of hormone in the blood to be able to activate target cells. Now, relative number of receptors on the target cells and affinity of binding. So how well those hormones bind to the receptor, affinity of binding between receptor and hormone. Now, hormones can influence the number of their receptors. We have upregulation when target cells form more receptors in response to the hormone, or downregulation. Target cells lose receptors in response to the hormone. So how hormones circulating in the blood? So they either can circulate in the blood free, or they bind to, or they bound to transport proteins. Now, steroids and thyroid hormone, because they are hydrophobic, they cannot just float in your blood freely. So they are attached to blood plasma proteins. All others circulate without carriers. Now, the concentration of circulating hormone reflects rate of release and speed of inactivation and removal from the body. So we increase rate of release, we decrease inactivation speed, then we what? We increase the amount of hormone in the bloodstream, or concentration of hormone. Hormones are removed from the blood by degrading enzyme, kidneys, and liver. And half time is the time required for hormones blood level to decrease by half. Multiple hormones may interact with each other in several ways. One interaction is called permissiveness. Permissiveness means you give a permission, kind of like that. That's the similarity between two words. Permissiveness means one hormone cannot exert its effect without another hormone being present. Synergist, more than one hormone produce the same effect on the target cells, or antagonism, one or more hormones oppose the action of another hormone, right? So that's how hormones interact with each other. Now, blood level of hormones are controlled by negative feedback system, right? It means you remember, guys, what negative feedback is. You increase the concentration of hormone and it leads a negative effect on the release of hormone, right? Because we want a hormone in a narrow, desirable range. So hormones are synthesized and released in response to 3 types of stimuli: humoral stimuli, neural stimuli, and hormonal stimuli. Humoral means something in the fluids of your body, because humoral means fluids, right? Mostly in your blood. So some stimulus in your blood plasma, neural stimulus, or hormonal stimulus. Now, humoral, do not confuse with hormonal. So humoral is the simplest regulation process. Changing blood levels of ions and nutrients directly stimulates secretion of hormones. For example, calcium. So we have decreased calcium in the blood, right? Because it's in the blood, it's already humoral response. It's inside the fluids of your body. So we have decreased blood calcium concentration, and this decrease in concentration stimulate parathyroid gland to secrete PTH, parathyroid hormone, and PTH causes calcium concentration to rise, right? So that's a simple humoral stimulation. Calcium down, PTH release, calcium up, right? Concentration of calcium. So here it shows you that capillary blood contains low concentration of calcium, which stimulate thyroid. Okay, that's parathyroid gland, right over here, posterior, on the posterior side of the thyroid gland. Secretion of parathyroid hormone by parathyroid gland, and this increase, it acts on osteoclast, if you remember from previous course, and osteoclast start resorb your bones, and calcium is released in the bloodstream, right? So calcium goes up. Neural stimuli. When nerve fibers stimulate hormone release. Sympathetic neuron system fibers stimulate adrenal medulla to secrete catecholamines. Catecholamines are epinephrine and norepinephrine. So we can see that here's our preganglionic sympathetic fibers. So it's autonomic nervous system, right? So preganglionic sympathetic fibers stimulates adrenal medulla over here to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So that's a neural stimulus. And hormonal stimulus probably the most complex and also very common stimulus. When hormones stimulate other endocrine glands to release their hormones. So let's see over here. So here we have hypothalamus, right? So hypothalamus is part of your central nervous system, but it's also part of the endocrine system. So hypothalamus release hormones. Those hormones are called releasing hormones, right? Releasing hormones. They stimulate anterior pituitary gland to secrete what we call tropic hormones. So releasing hormones, then tropic hormones, and those tropic hormones stimulate target organs to secrete, or target endocrine glands to secrete their hormones, like thyroid gland, adrenal cortex, not medulla, but cortex or testis, right? So let's look over here. So hypothalamic hormones stimulate the release of most anterior pituitary hormones. Anterior pituitary hormones stimulates targets to secrete still more hormones, right? So again, over here, hypothalamus stimulate anterior pituitary stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete their hormones. So this is our hormonal stimuli. And we call it hypothalamic pituitary target endocrine organ feedback loop, Goodness, that's, yeah, a lot, but it does make sense. We have hypothalamus, then we have pituitary, and then we have target endocrine organ. And loop means that hormone from these target organs inhibit release of anterior pituitary hormones, right? So these hormones then have negative feedback on anterior pituitary, and we decrease this release of tropic hormones, right? Now, adrenal medulla. Epinephrine stimulates, adrenal medulla release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine stimulates metabolic activities, bronchial dilation, and blood flow to skeletal muscle and the heart, right? So, you know, epinephrine is a part of our sympathetic regulation, right? So when you're under stress, what do you want? You want to increase metabolic activities of the cell. You want your bronchioles to dilate, so more oxygen enters your lungs, and you want more blood to skeletal muscles because you either, you know, exercising or even when you're under stress, and this stress means maybe you need to, you know, you're in danger situation, maybe you need to run for your life, and also you need to increase the heart contractility. Norepinephrine influence peripheral vasoconstriction and blood pressure. So this is how people respond to stress. There is two types of stress. There is short-term stress and prolonged stress. So look what happens when person is at short-term stress. And this means, so when would you have a short-term stress? No, can be different situation, but one of them can be when you face some dangerous person, for example, right? So you have nerve impulses from central nervous system to your spinal cord, right? Then we have these preganglionic sympathetic fibers that innervate adrenal medulla, and adrenal medulla secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. And a short-term stress response increases your heart rate, increases blood pressure. Now liver converts glycogen to glucose, right? Because we want more glucose for your muscles to contract, right? Including your heart, including your skeletal muscles, and glucose is released to blood, so we increase glucose level. Dilation of bronchioles, right? So more oxygen. Changes in blood flow pattern, leading to decrease of flow to digestive system and increase flow to skeletal muscles and reduce urine output and increase metabolic rate, right? That's a short-term stress. Now, prolonged stress, we have hypothalamus that released what we call releasing hormone, right? Specifically CRH or corticotropin releasing hormone. All hormones from hypothalamus has this name releasing. So hypothalamus releases hormones that activates anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary releases tropic hormone. Releasing hormone, tropic hormone, and specifically ACTH. So adrenocorticotropic hormone. Tropic means it's going to affect other endocrine glands. And what it's going to affect? Adrenocortico. So it's cortex of the adrenal gland. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. So it activates, now look, not medulla, but the cortex of the adrenal gland. And cortex secretes mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids. Both are steroid hormones. And what they do, they, like mineralocorticoids, you can see they actually gonna control the concentration of some minerals, right? Specifically sodium and potassium. So they, this actually leads to retention of sodium by kidney. When kidney retains sodium, it's retained water. When you retain water, you have more water in your blood vessels, your blood pressure goes up, right? That's what happens when people are under long stress. So no stress. Now, glucocorticoids, you see over here, it's gonna control glucose level. right? Mineralocorticoids control sodium level and water level. Glucocorticoids, glucose level. But what we want during the stress, glucose will go up, right? So this is gonna increase blood glucose, and proteins and fats will be converted to glucose or broken down for energy. So glucose level goes up, and glucocorticoids also suppress your immune system. Right, so we said that short-term stress, one example can be if you're facing a dangerous situation, right? So you outside, maybe you see like a big dog running towards you. So that's what's gonna happen. That's a short-term stress. Prolonged stress, example can be, for example, if you cold, you go outside and you stay outside for, you know, a couple hours and you all freezing, right? You're really cold. That's a stress to your body. So I don't want to give you, of course, it can be emotional, prolonged stress as well, right? But, you know, I want to give you, everybody probably would think like, yeah, if I'm stressed out about my relationship with my husband or wife, right? Or my kids bothering me or my parents, that can be some emotional prolonged stress. That also this is the how your body handling it. But just normal situation, when you're cold, for example, when you're cold, this is also your response. And when you're cold, you're thinking like, you know, I go outside, for example, I washed my hair all wet, I go outside and I kind of like, I really cold, then I come back and next day I have cold. But cold is caused by bacteria. So what it has to do with you being outside for several hours and being like extremely cold. But when you secrete glucocorticoids, you see what it does? It suppresses your immune system. When it suppresses your immune system, now bacteria can enter your body easily, or virus, right? Yeah, did I say cold by bacteria? Cold by virus, right? But so you have virus that now your immune system is suppressed, so you're not fighting this virus, so you have higher chances to get cold or even flu, right? When you, for example, cold. So that's how your body deal with short-term and long-term stress. Okay, now what we're gonna cover, the rest couple slides, I just selected organs that secrete hormones, and the rest you guys will need to read in your lab PowerPoint. So pineal gland, small gland hanging from the roof of the third ventricle. Pinealocytes are actually like neurons, they're really neurons, and they secrete melatonin derived from serotonin. I need to double check if they're neurons or not. Ignore it for a minute, but I'm pretty sure they are. Melatonin affect timing of sexual maturation and puberty, day-night cycles, and also physiological processes that show rhythmic variation, like body temperature, sleep, appetite, right? Pancreas. Pancreas is triangular gland behind the stomach. We already mentioned that pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine function, so it has endocrine and exocrine cells. Acinar cells, those are exocrine cells, and they produce enzyme-rich juice for digestion, and we will cover it when we talk about digestive system. But there is other cells. They form what is called pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, and they contain endocrine cells. So two types of cells, alpha cells and beta cells. Beta, those beautiful cells, beta, they produce insulin, and alpha cells produce glucagon. Now, insulin, everybody knows, insulin lower your blood sugar. When your blood sugar goes down, is hypoglycemic. So hypoglycemic, low glucose level. Glucagon gonna raise your blood sugar. So they are antagonistic hormones. So it's hyperglycemic hormone. So here, this area kind of like, you know, look different. You see like circle. This is pancreatic islet, and we have glucagon producing cells that kind of have this pinkish appearance, and insulin producing cells, they blue. And those cells are acinar cells, and they secrete digestive juices. So everything like pretty much surrounding these islets of Langerhans. Now glucagon, a major target for glucagon is the liver, where it promotes gluconeogenesis is over here, glycogenolysis. Now, glycogenolysis means lysis, you break something, right? So it's a lysis of glycogen. So breakdown of glycogen to glucose. So when you eat cake, right, when you eat pasta, even when you eat lots of carbs, right, you digest them into a simple sugar, like glucose, you absorb this glucose, and this glucose from your digestive system, the first destination for this glucose is your liver. In liver, those hepatocytes, they connect glucose molecules together, making glycogen, right? And you store it as a glycogen. You also can store glycogen in your muscles, right? Now, when glucagon is released by pancreas, it causes breakdown of this glycogen into glucose, and glucose is released into blood, and glucose level goes up. Gluconeogenesis means, genesis means creation, right? Like a book of Genesis. Creation of glucose. So it's a synthesis of glucose. But why it's called neogenesis? Because you make glucose from non-carbohydrates. Because you know, polysaccharides, you actually break down polysaccharides and make glucose. Now you make glucose from lactic acid and non-carbohydrates, like for fat, for example, gluconeogenesis. And glucose is released to the blood, and glucose level goes up. Insulin, as I said, antagonistic hormone, and effect of insulin, low blood glucose level, enhance membrane transport of glucose into fat and muscle cells. So you take in this glucose from your blood into fat, muscles, participate in neural development, learning, memory, and it's inhibit glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? So everything that glucagon enhance and promotes, insulin inhibit. Now insulin acts on the special enzyme tyrosine kinase, but we are not going into details. But what happened that when insulin attaches to its receptors, it stimulates cascade of the reaction and glucose uptake by a cell. And then when this glucose enter a cell, then it can be either used to make ATP, or it can be used to form glycogen, or some cells, unfortunately for us, right, can convert this glucose to fat. Actually, lots of glucose is converted into fat. So the amount of carbohydrates in your body is very small, because all this glucose is converted to fat when we eat too much sweets, right? Or we eat too much bread or pancakes. So particularly it happens in adipose tissue. Right, so here you can see the regulation of glucose level in the bloodstream, right? So here's our normal homeostasis, normal glucose level about 90 to 100, 90 milligram per 100 milliliters of blood. Right now, when the glucose level goes up, right, pancreas secrete insulin. Insulin stimulate glycogen formation in your liver, so you can store this glucose. You have too much of it, let's go ahead and store it as a glycogen for those days when you need energy. or it can be uptaken by your tissue cells, right? Muscle cells, fat cells, right? And so the point is glucose goes inside the cell, either inside your liver cells or adipocytes or muscle cells, and glucose and blood glucose level falls to normal range, right? But when blood glucose level drops, pancreas, now alpha cells, so here we had beta cells. Alpha cells secrete glucagon. Glucagon stimulate glycogen breakdown, right? So opposite process, and blood glucose rises to normal range, right? So now homeostatic imbalances of insulin. We either can have not enough insulin or too much insulin, right? If we have not enough insulin, so insulin level is low, that's diabetes mellitus. So it's hyposecretion. So either low secretion or hyperactivity, or insulin is secreted, but it does not affect target cells, right? That's why we have type 1, type 2 diabetes. I think that's in your lab lecture. So 3 cardinal signs of DM: polyuria, huge urine output, polydipsia, excessive thirst, and polyphagia, excessive hunger. So that's not enough insulin. When we have hyperinsulinism, then we have too much insulin, right? Excessive insulin secretion results in hypoglycemia, so not enough glucose now in your bloodstream, disorientation, unconsciousness. Now, some other organs that secrete hormones, ovaries and placenta. So gonads produce steroid sex hormones. Gonads here including both ovaries and testes. But ovaries produce estrogen, progesterone, that is responsible for maturation of female reproductive organs, appearance of female secondary sexual characteristic, breast development, and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa, so in the uterus, right? Placenta secretes also estrogen, progesterone, plus it secretes human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. And this will be covered when we talk about reproductive system. Testes produce testosterone, stimulate maturation of male, testosterone stimulates or initiates maturation of male reproductive organs, causes appearance of male secondary sexual characteristics, sex drive, necessary for normal sperm production, and maintains reproductive organs in their functional state. Other hormone producing structure like your heart produce atrial natriuretic peptide, ANP, and this is one that reduces blood pressure by reducing blood volume and reducing sodium concentration in the blood, right? So heart taking care of itself, right? Heart produces hormone that reduces blood pressure. Now gastrointestinal tract, enter endocrine cells, that's how those cells are called inside your gastrointestinal tract. They secrete gastrin that stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid, secretin, stimulate liver, pancreas, cholecystokinin stimulates pancreas, gallbladder, hepatopancreatic sphincter. So this all gonna be covered in detail in the digestive system. And we will mention the ANP when we cover cardiovascular system. Now, kidneys secrete erythropoietin that signals production of red blood cells, and renin that initiate renin-angiotensin aldosterone. They forgot to put renin angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. This renin, it's actually increase your blood pressure, right? So look, this ANP decreases blood pressure, right? Makes sense. Heart produces hormones that decrease blood pressure. Well, sorry, renin, what? It increases blood pressure. Skin produce cholecalciferol, that is precursor of vitamin D. Adipose tissue produce leptin that control your appetite and energy use. What else we have? Yeah, just pretty much one more slide. Skeleton produce osteocalcin that affects beta cells to divide and secrete more insulin, improving glucose hanging and reducing body fat. Thymus produce all these thymulin, thymopoietin, thymothine. Those are all hormones that involved in development of T lymphocytes in your immune system. Right, so, and here's the kind of like a diagram of our hypothalamus, pituitary, endocrine target organ system, right? So how we have, and that's also show us posterior pituitary gland and all the hormones that are released by posterior, anterior pituitary, and their target organs. Because many of these hormones released by pituitary gland are tropic hormones. Tropic means they affect other endocrine glands. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. Thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful.